Hello, and welcome to the Help I Started a Business Now What podcast, otherwise known as the Now What Show. And this is our final episode of the season.
Such a great title, by the way.
Oh, I know. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm like, it's just eventually going to be like, welcome to the Now What Show, is I think what we'll probably do next season. Today, I am privileged to have Nicole from Dear Handmade Life join us with some great advice that we're going to get into. But Nicole, why don't you tell us, what is Dear Handmade Life?
Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole. I'm the CEO and creative director at Dear Handmade Life, and we produce events and curate community for creatives and creative small business owners. And we do that through an annual conference that we have every spring in Ventura, California, called Craftcation Conference, where we have over 200 business classes, DIY craft workshops, and wellness activities and social gatherings over the course of 5 days at the beach in California, which is amazing. And then we also produce a Modern Makers Festival called Patchwork Show. And that's a community festival and market that we do in various cities throughout California. And in addition to that, we have a podcast and a blog and an online shop and online courses. And we have an online community for creative small business owners called Dear Handmade Life, the Club, where we offer mentorship and education for creative small business owners.
Whew, that's a lot. And something you've built over a period of years, right? So tell us, when did you first start Dear Handmade Life, and kind of how has it evolved a little bit? Because I think that's always important for people to hear.
Yeah. Well, it started actually with my own personal business. So I had a handmade business that I started in, I want to say 1999, maybe 2000. It was over 20 years ago. And I was painting at that time. So I was making my paintings and selling them at, flea markets and church holiday craft fairs and Christmas office parties, anywhere that they would have me. I sold my stuff. And it evolved from there into taking those paintings and so painting on canvas and sewing them on purses, and then eventually taking those designs and screen printing them on clothes and having a clothing line and doing trade shows and doing a lot of wholesale and retail and everything, just having kind of a thriving handmade business. And then teaching. So teaching other people craft and business skills, and just kind of realizing that was where I wanted to focus my effort, was on the teaching side of things. I think I got to the point where I had taken my own handmade business as far as I wanted to take it. And I started to really want to help other people be able to do the thing that I did. We all spend most of our waking hours working. And if you do not like what you do for a living, it is impossible to like your life. And so as a creative person myself, that's where my heart is. Those are the people who I'm drawn to, who I want to help. And so started doing that. At the time, I had a business partner who was my aunt, and we started Patchwork Show, just a little craft fair with 20 vendors in the parking lot of her shop. And we didn't even know it was going to be something we did more than once. And until we were there and we saw how much people loved it and how well received it was. And we knew immediately, oh, we've got something here. So we kept doing Patchwork Show. It took off slowly because she and I both had other businesses. I was still doing my clothing line, which was called Random Nicole, the thing that I had started way back when. And then eventually we saw that these vendors at our shows had this need for education and community. And that was how Craftcation Conference came about, to help them. Most of us creatives are working alone. So we don't have a water cooler to commiserate, to share information, to support each other, to say, oh yeah, me too, I get that. Or what did you do about this? Okay, that's a good idea. So we wanted to find a way to offer that, to make that learning curve shorter than it was for us as we started our businesses. And that was how Craftcation was born. And again, it was something that we just thought we're going to do this thing. We didn't know it was going to happen more than once. And now, and that first one was in 2012. So we're coming up on our 11th year. I think it's our 11th conference because we skipped a few because of COVID. So now
Sure.
it's hard to keep track, but definitely over 10. And it's just grown there too. And I think with everything that I've done, it was always not necessarily with Random Nicole, but with Patchwork Show and Craftcation, it was me seeing a need in my own community and wishing that there was something there, and then having to make it, to fulfill that need.
Yes, yes, starting to step in and create that thing that you see is missing. And it's an evolution over time as well as another key thing that I'm hearing you see. You didn't try to launch Craftcation and do the patchwork shows and all of this at the same time. Part of it was a journey you went on, first with your business, then discovering, oh, I really like the teaching, and then evolving from there. I think that's an important distinction as well, because as new business owners, we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have to be doing all the things. Like, yeah, I'm gonna sell at craft shows. I'm gonna sell online. I'm gonna sell wholesale, and in year one, and you're not gonna be alive at the end of
Yeah, and
that.
I think the other thing is that people think they have to have it all figured out
Mm,
before before they do it. And I definitely don't think that you should jump and the net will appear. I'm not a believer in that, but I think you need to start to weave that net, from all of these different things, and then jump. But you can't have everything all figured out. If you wait until it's all figured out, you're never going to start. Bottom line, it's not going to happen. Like when we did the first Craftcation, I had never been to a conference as an attendee. I didn't know what a conference was even supposed to be like. So I just, we created what we wanted. Of course, we didn't realize at the time we weren't going to get to like attend anything as we were doing all the work behind the scenes. But yeah, so I had no idea what I was doing, except that I saw this need. I made what I thought, what I wanted as a member of that community, and um, it took off from there and kind of took on a life of its own.
mhm. So speaking of that, building out your first net, let's help all the new business owners build out a little bit of their net before they get ready to head into their first craft fair. So you've been running patchwork shows for quite a while, and one of the natural first sales points for a lot of creators and artisans is to go to craft fairs and to start to sell there. So why don't we go through maybe some do's and don'ts on things people should think about as they prepare to do their first craft fair?
Absolutely. I think that the first one is to remember what I already said, and that you're never going to be 100% prepared. So know that, but prepare as much as you can. Remember that each show is just one show. So if it doesn't go well, it doesn't mean what you make is horrible and your business is going to fail. It just means that that show might not have been the most successful. And there are also other metrics to look at for a show besides just your sales. It's, did you meet other vendors? What did you learn from the experience? There's so many other things to look at, and ways that you can, and other kind of benefits you can get from a craft fair. I think the other thing that I think is really important is to really research the show before you do it. So that means looking at their website, looking at their social media, their blog, whatever whatever they have available online to see, and if possible go to the show as a customer and look around and ask yourself, does it seem like my business would be a good fit at this show? Do these people who are walking around this show look like and act like and seem like the type of people who would purchase what I make? And that alone is probably the best piece of advice, because I see so often, a vendor will be at a show and it's just like, what are you doing here? These are not your people. Like, you're making this high end, crystal encrusted something or other, and these are a bunch of like gothic hipsters, that are looking for, snarky embroidery. This isn't the fit for you. But I think there is a show for everyone. It's just a matter of finding that show. And then, making a great display, like putting some time and effort into that. And it doesn't need to be super expensive. Just go on Pinterest and, or Google, craft fair booth ideas. There are so many things you could make yourself, so many things you could get on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace and repaint in your brand colors, have signage, have a place for people to sign up for your email list at the show. Like, use it as an opportunity to build your email list. You can also use it to build your Instagram or social media following by, having a little like photo booth opportunity or doing a giveaway for people who tag you in their photos and their stories. I think the other thing too is to make sure that you have enough inventory. Generally, you should have 10 times the amount that you want to sell. So let's just say that you want to gross $100 at a craft fair. You should have $1,000 worth of inventory. So it's a question I get often, is like, how much stuff do I need to have? So that's a good litmus test for it. But also look at that particular show and think about the cost of that show. So you might have a show, like I remember I moved, when I was kind of letting go of my business random, Nicole, I moved to a new area and there was a farmer's market that was 2 blocks away from my house. And it was only, I think, 3 or 4 hours. The booth fee was $25. And it was so easy for me to do it. And I had all this leftover inventory for my business that I was closing. So I started doing that market. Now, if I went there and I only sold $100 or $200 worth of stuff, it was still a success because my booth fee was $25. It's 2 blocks from my house. I had this stuff already that I wanted to get rid of. It was only a few hours. There were so many factors that went into that. However, I've done other shows where I've had to travel out of town, get a hotel room. The booth fee was $500. And at a show like that, I'm expecting to do, over $1,000 just to break even. So I think considering all of those different things, the ROI is going to be different for every show, and the metrics are going to be different for every show.
Mhm. I love that you also talk about making sure you walk around and talk to the other people at the show. I think that's the key one that I've noticed when I've done some shows. There's a number of people that don't talk to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a slow show too, it's good to build those relationships and have those conversations. And a lot of that's where the organic, what shows do you go to? And you start to learn from people too, especially if you're new. And there's
Mm-hmm.
people, sometimes you can tell, you look at the booth and you're like, yep, you've been doing this a while. When you
Mm-hmm.
look at the booth, I always feel like those are really good people to go talk to because they probably know where the best shows are and they probably
Absolutely.
know the things that you should consider. And sometimes those relationships actually are a key in the early days of your business because even just digging around on Google trying to find, oh, that is just an exercise in frustration.
Yeah.
Other people at these shows are definitely one of your best. I think one of your best bets. And what other tips do you have people that are doing for craft fairs? We've gotten into some good ones so far. You got any other good tricks up your sleeve?
I have so many tricks up my sleeve. It's hard to think of them all. I do think, there you have to consider, look at how brick and mortar stores run and think of your booth at the craft fair as a brick and mortar store. Treat it as such. So you don't want to just like throw a piece of fabric on a table, and put some stuff on there. Like, really consider every aspect. I talked earlier about your booth display. So consider, having your stuff at different heights, having it on risers, having everything branded in your colors, having a sign with your business name, all of that stuff, the same stuff you would have at a brick and mortar store. But also think about they how they lay out a store. So like, consider how you're laying out your booth. Is it welcoming? Is there stuff in the way? Like, where is your most expensive stuff? Is your fragile stuff on the end of a table? Is it easy for people to look at things? Are your prices out? Do you want your prices out, or do you want people to ask you? I say have your prices out. But some people don't. I think it just kind of shortens that, awkwardness that I don't want to feel. And then when people come into your booth, acknowledge them. Like, I think there's a line between being a great salesperson and being like that classic stereotype of like a used car salesperson. So you want to like, hey, welcome to my booth, but you don't want to just like they walk in and you're like, hi, thanks so much for coming to my booth. My name is Nicole and I started this business 10 years ago because of my love of yarn, and all of my yarns are organic, and and going on and on and on. I will see that happen a lot when I go to a craft fair, and it's like, give me a chance to make a connection to your stuff
Hmm.
before you give me all that information, because it doesn't mean anything to me yet. Like, I want to connect first. And then if this show is slow, I mean, just connecting with your customers any way that you can, because you don't know, maybe they're not buying something today, they're going to buy something later. Make sure they know where to find you. And if the show is slow, especially, take all the time in the world and listen to your customer. I'm not saying to be fake. I'm definitely not about that in any way, but find a way to connect with them. If whatever it may be, they have a kid who's 4, you have a kid that's 4, like, oh my gosh, what is your kid, like, what is your kid up to? Do they watch Paw Patrol? Oh yeah, mine too. And just make that connection there. I've had that happen at like a slow show where, I was just like sitting in my booth, like, oh my God, I hate this. And I was like, no, get up off of your seat, walk around, reorganize your booth. Even if what you're doing doesn't need to be done, look active, look like, you're welcoming and you're alive in there, because nobody wants to walk into a booth where somebody's just sitting, with their head down in that like depressed Charlie Brown way. Nobody wants to go into that. They want to go somewhere exciting and fun. And if what you make is portable, by all means, like, you can have your making stuff in the booth. Now, there's a line between getting so engrossed in what you're doing that you're not paying attention to your customers, and having it be a conversation piece and a way to invite them into your process. So make sure that you can drop it at any time. Make sure that it's something that you can do while chatting, and use that as a way to draw them into the behind the scenes of your business.
Hmm. I love that idea as well, bringing them into the conversation. And so I am a food artisan, so I have a very natural way of getting people into the conversation with, "Ooh, would you like a sample?" And that hooks
Absolutely.
so many people. And then once they've sampled it, then I have a chance to really start explaining my process a little bit and what I'm thinking about, and get to ask them more questions about kind of their food style, how they eat. A big one that I run into is people don't know what to do with the products. And so when you start talking about ways you can use those products, and they're like, oh, and I want this one, and now I want this one, and oh, maybe this friend needs this one. But we've engaged in a conversation, so I can understand more about them. It was where I had learned that so many people wanted 4-ounce jars, and in our local market
Mm,
here, everyone does the smallest jar they do is 8 ounce. And a lot of people do 16 ounce, just huge jars of like jams and other products. And we have this huge demographic trend of either people that are widowed or single, and a lot of people live alone.
mhm,
An 8-ounce jar of jam is a lot of jam. My husband and I can't eat that much jam that quickly. So I really learned that 4-ounce was where it was at. And it was exactly what you were talking about. Those conversations with customers of, discovering how many widowers in a lot of cases were buying the products because they were and you could just see the little look on their face like, oh, dinner's gonna be so good when I bring this home. Right. And
mhm.
that inspires me then as an artisan to really think about that in my craft. Oh, well, are there other things that would fit these same niches? So I think that exactly what you're talking about, you have to talk to people. Otherwise, it will be a slog.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us more about now. Some craft fairs, some shows will just be here, register, pay your booth fee. But then
Mhm.
some craft fairs you get into are juried. Let's talk a little bit about the difference and what people should think about before applying for a juried show where you have to submit information well ahead of time. So can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. The shows that I run are all juried, and most of the shows that I've done as a vendor have been juried. The ones that I've done that aren't juried are generally smaller shows, shows with a smaller booth fee. It might be something like I used to live in LA, and there were a lot of, like around the holiday times, there were a lot of shows that were in offices because these people were working
Mhm.
really, they were in the entertainment business or the advertising business, and they were working like really wacky hours. And you know, somebody I know knew somebody who worked there and was just like, hey, come set up your stuff during lunch. And some of those were my best shows ever, and those were not juried. It was just kind of like a who do you know situation. I generally speaking, once you're a little more established, I definitely recommend juried shows. They tend to, having something be curated tends to help the customers who go there know what to expect. Like they know it's going to be a certain type of quality or a certain type of item. If you are applying for a juried show, uh, definitely take your time with the application. Make sure that you don't have a typo in your email address. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten an irate email from someone who was really upset with me, even threatening me, because they hadn't gotten their acceptance or decline notice. And maybe it was kind of jerky of me, but I would send a screenshot of their typo in their email, and I'm like, we sent your email, but you
It
typed an N instead
bounced.
of an M, so it didn't go to you. So
Yeah.
just taking your time with application, making sure all the information you submit is correct, reading it, so that you're not missing anything or doing anything wrong. I mean, these juries are often going through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications. If they ask you to submit only 5 pictures, please submit 5. Don't submit 15. If they want more, they'll ask for it. And then I think having a strong online presence where someone can see what you make and the branding of your business in the blink of an eye is important. Whether it's your own website or your Etsy shop or even your Instagram, you don't have to have a fancy website. You just have to have a place where a jury can go, see what you make, get an idea of your business, your branding, all of that in an instant so that they can make a decision. Because usually that's what it comes down to, is that first, they'll look at your thing and they're like, yes, this is good for our show, or no, this is not a good fit for our show. And it's never, at least with us, it's never as a jury, you know, this stuff is bad. It's just, this is not a fit for our show. And I know it's hard not to take it personally, but that's what it is. I mean, ultimately, we want the vendors who come to our show to do well at our show. And so if we look at something and we're like, oh, this doesn't really seem like the types of people who come to our show are going to be interested in this, even though it might be a cool thing, it's not for us. We want them to be successful at the show. So those are some things that I would consider if you're applying to a juried show.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the idea that don't necessarily take the rejection personally is really
Hmm.
wise advice, especially when you're starting, because there are things that the organizers of that show may know that you don't know about the audience that comes. You may have designs where you're like, oh, the people that come to the show are usually
Hmm.
50 and over, and that's a design for a 20 something. We don't think you're probably going to do well. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your design. It just means there's something they know that you don't. So it's impossible to figure everything out about the shows that even that have existed before. It's all, research based unless you've been to them, like what you talked about. So I think that's important and
Yeah,
wise
absolutely.
advice. Like just don't be offended. It just wasn't a fit that time. Or maybe they had too many of a particular category. You can only, as a show, you can't have 50 vendors and all 50 of them are jewelry unless it's supposed to be a jewelry show. If it's a craft fair, you have to have a balance of them as well. And so you just may not have fit that set. And so you keep trying and you move to your next set of shows. I think that one's just don't get disheartened if people say no at the
Hmm.
beginning.
Absolutely. And I read this book and I was just going to see if I had it in here, but it's called Playing Big. That's it. Playing Big by Tara Moore, and it's about inner critic, rejection, all kinds of stuff like that. It was a great book, but one of the things she says in it is rejection isn't a judgment on you or what you make. Rejection is a judgment on whether you fit into whatever that person, that business, that whatever is looking for at that moment. That's the only judgment that's happening there. And I think that's such an important thing to remember with any type of rejection, whether it's from a craft show or a romantic, or whatever the situation may be. It's just about how you fit into what they're looking for at that particular moment.
Hmm. Wonderful words of advice. Well, now tell our watchers, listeners, everybody that's following this podcast, how do they find out more about Dear Handmade Life and everything you have going on?
Yeah, you can find us online at dearhandmadelife.com, and that's dear like you're writing a letter, DEAR. And then also we're on all the social medias, but mainly on Instagram, and it's Dear Handmade Life. And then we also have an Instagram just for our patchwork show for our Makers Festival that's called The Patchwork Show.
Mhm. All right, wonderful. And thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.